Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Pee-wee's Big Adventure from 1985. And this is one of the winners of my Patreon movie review vote. If you would like to have a movie selection up for the vote next month, then click on the link below for my Patreon and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Pee-wee's Big Adventure is probably one of the greatest comedies of the 1980s. And when saying that, you'd think it'd be sort of representative of the 1980s, which Pee-wee's Big Adventure really isn't. It's not your typical 1980s comedy. It's not what you think of when you think of 1980s comedy. It doesn't embody that kind of a thing. When you think of an 80s comedy, sure, you might think of this as one of the best, but it doesn't embody that. Because Pee-wee's Big Adventure is kind of a thing unto itself. It kind of predated a lot of the humor that The Simpsons and Family Guy and a lot of things would do much later, helping it kind of age a lot better in syndication on TV and through modern viewpoints, because there's probably comedies that made a lot more in 1985 that we don't really talk about, or at least we weren't talking about when I was a kid. And when I was a kid, this film was already a little too old. I was like 2 when this came out, so it really kept moving on. Me and my siblings, my brother and sister, watched this a lot, and it's because it had this kind of like different, almost felt like a modern flow in the 90s kind of flow to it. It is both parodying and also loving about the road movie. It makes fun of various genre conventions and things that road movies have done a million times before, and very laughably so. I mean, you know, who gets arrested for ripping off those tags on mattresses seems to love those road movies as much as it wants to make fun of them. This isn't exactly picking on exact things other than like maybe the postman always rings twice with the waitress who wants to move to Paris and all that. Other than that, it doesn't really do exact parodies the way like Mel Brooks would do or something like that. It's kind of just picking various genre conventions. It's like watching the TV generation or the baby boomers who grew up with TV writing a screenplay based on what they love of TV and movies through TV, and I think Pee-wee's Big Adventure uses that. It's like what you accept from storytelling from watching a bunch of stories. That's what Pee-wee's Big Adventure does so well. You think about how awesome it would be to go on a road trip and all the various adventures you would go on. That's Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Paul Reubens inhabits that so well. I mean, the whole film relies on his performance, and I don't think people realize, because he was just playing Pee-wee over and over again. This was based off the success of an HBO special, and he was appearing on talk shows, like I think Johnny Carson, various talk shows. So Pee-wee was, I guess, no, I don't really know how known, but he did stuff. The whole idea of this movie is odd, and it kind of spun off more, and you know, he'd do Pee-wee's Playhouse and so forth. The character of Pee-wee and how Paul Reubens perfectly encapsulates the idea and the view of a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old. His house is like what you imagine what your house will be like, which will be awesome. Not like your dumb, boring parents. They have this like nice furniture and stuff. Why don't they have fun things like a machine that makes breakfast, and we can have breakfast, and I can have a fish tank in the window. Like all stuff like that. Like that doesn't even make sense. Like clearly that's on a set, not in the house that we view. Having tons of stuff on his lawn, having an octopus sprinkler. It looks like it's pretty terrible for his neighbors, but clearly they've all come to terms with it at the point of this movie, so whatever. But it's like that view, like, you know, you want your house to be a mountain with tons of cats, or have a side of the Millennium Falcon in it or something, and then someone explains to you what money is and how things work, and you're like, oh shit, I can't have dreams, never mind. But before you hear things like that, you have the idea that is like Pee-wee's Big Adventure, that your house will be like this, that your embodiment, your energy of a little kid will keep moving on, what your view of being an adult will be like, and how you don't need to listen to all these societal norms that clearly you actually have to. But before you learn that, your ideal version of adulthood is basically what Pee-wee is incarnate. And there's lots of comedies about man-children. There's tons of them. It's like Judd Apatow's whole career or something. None of those age as well as Pee-wee. Pee-wee never needs to grow up. There's never a scene where they make Pee-wee feel bad for having this childlike energy, that it's gone too far, that he can't be this way anymore, and he needs to grow up. He is just the energy of it bottled and encapsulated within this film or within this character. He's not asked to mature or anything like that, because first off, I think he's a cartoon character. People recognize that at the time. The reviews that get it, which there weren't a lot of people, Gene Siskel put it as one of his worst films of the year, Vincent Canby hated it. Pauline Kael was kind of the only one who seemed to get it of the reviews of the time I could read. There are a few people who got it, but most people generally hated it. But it's the idea that he is a cartoon. Bugs Bunny never grows up, really, and Pee-wee shouldn't either. But it also addresses it in such a way that it's so obvious obvious. Like, yes, everyone has to grow up, everyone has to mature, but do you need to address it? It's kind of an obvious thing. Does Pee-wee's Big Adventure need to say it? Pee-wee is the embodiment of something. The embodiment of something shouldn't have to mature and everything, because it's just this pure, beautiful ridiculousness, having lots of attitude, telling people ridiculous lines and things, knowing it's parody and doing those things, but not having to acknowledge it in a way, which is smart. Pee-wee's very good at understanding its sense of reality and what that exists in, and almost making it untangible. You don't need to have specific rules that are pointed out to you. Maybe the filmmakers know it, maybe they didn't, and it seemingly worked out, but they don't really get into that, you know. In fact, all the cutaways, as Pee-wee goes on this big adventure, and he goes to various different places as he's lost his bike, which is the plot. I don't need to go over the plot, because basically, like, Francis Buxton steals Pee-wee's bike, he goes on an adventure to find it. Hopefully, I'll mention every little different place he went on, but if you watch every different riff he goes on, the difference between those cutaway gags and all the cutaway gags we've had since this movie, we've had them before, they were in movies before, but this film kind of predates a lot of things that would do cutaway gags. I think the thing about these cutaway gags is they always sent a sense of reality, a sense that there is a reality to these worlds that he's going into. When he gets in the car with a convict, you immediately get the radio report, it sets it up, you understand the world, you understand the situation. There's very few times they do what the traditional cutaway gag is. They go reality joke. And Pee-wee's Big Adventure lets you set in that reality. Why is it raining when he goes to see Madame Ruby? I mean, frankly, he could just go to Madame Ruby. It's just to set up he's distraught. It's to set up the situation in the scene, which this film does all the time. You always understand the sense of reality of where he is. That's kind of the genius of it. When I was watching it this time, I was like, oh my god, like every time they like let you exist in this thing. They let it grow. They let the ambiance grow in it. They let the world of each of these cutaway gags exist and play in your mind a little bit so you're there. This film was the directorial debut of Tim Burton, and I think it is probably one of my favorite Tim Burton movies. Not just because it's his first one and that's what I guess you're supposed to do or whatever. The thing I like about this film is funny Tim Burton, which I don't think people really talk about as much. He's a great comedy director when he wants to be. And even Beetlejuice, before he got Batman, he was a funnier guy. And this is kind of an unconventional choice for someone. I mean, it's a very unconventional movie, so Tim Burton's like perfect for it, particularly at this stage in his career. He'd done Vincent, he'd done Frankenweenie. He was being sought after by a lot of studios at the time. Warner Brothers picked him up. He had left Disney and he was going on to direct his own films. And I think this is kind of perfect for an animation director or someone from an animation background. I wouldn't say he's like Phil Lord and Chris Miller or Brad Bird or Andrew Stanton, because they were obviously more established animation directors and, you know, had directed animated movies, which Tim Burton at that time had not. I think he's from an animation background going to live action films, but he understands how to use that, and he's almost more comfortable in it than I think a more live action director would. I mean, look at Big Top Pee-wee, nobody likes because it doesn't have that fun sense to it. But also, there's a real sense of collaboration between Paul Reubens and Tim Burton, and the screenplay, which was written by Phil Hartman. Yes, that Phil Hartman, Paul Reubens, and Mike Varhall, I think, Varhall, and even the Danny Elfman score. And almost, by the way, that since we know the establishment of Tim Burton, we know the establishment of Danny Elfman. When we know the establishment and the auteur of Tim Burton and Danny Elfman and those collaborations, they don't feel like the Tim Burton we'd see later. It's like a different Tim Burton in this. You could say, oh, he couldn't really be himself, but I don't really think that's what it is. He was making a movie about an established character. He was doing what he should do as a director, and Danny Elfman's not doing like the children chorus crap or anything like that. They're doing their own thing. You know, this is Tim Burton's first feature film. It's, I think, Danny Elfman's second film he ever scored, and it would really launch like Danny Elfman become one of the great film composers. Tim Burton would become one of the biggest directors in Hollywood, establishing Tim Burton as someone who's very visual. There's so many things in this, like think about how many jokes you love in this, but think about how many visuals. The Large Marge thing couldn't be done without Tim Burton. And it plays so well off of Paul Reubens and the Pee-wee character. Think of like even the weird light up dinosaur things, which are a real thing and I'd love to go to one day. How Tim Burton uses that, how he uses sets, and those sets play off of Pee-wee so well. It's almost like Bugs Bunny or a great cartoon character playing off of a great background. Tim Burton seems to understand that. That's why I think this film plays so well. Pee-wee exists in that way that only an animator could really understand. Understand gags, understand how to use that. And Pee-wee the character is almost perfect for that kind of an interpretation. Tim Burton was very smart about doing that. But it's also like, I love Tim Burton's sense of comedy, his sense of like, he loves these old movies, he loves these genre conventions, but he also likes making fun of them. He's kind of a funnier director than we give him credit for. I think when you get to things like Pee-wee's Big Adventure and Beetlejuice, I think of how much fun I had while watching them. It's like they were very funny, silly, strange movies. Pee-wee's Big Adventure might be one of the strangest, having all these various ideas that are probably too much for kids, and probably ideas that went way over their heads as well. I mean, Large Marge gave me nightmares, but I still watched it every time. But also ideas that like were kind of ahead of their time in a lot of ways. With the Criminal and Pee-wee, there's a real sense of homoeroticism going on. I actually remember when I took my first film class, they kept talking about this film and all the hidden ideas within it. And it's kind of interesting because it really sneaks all that in. And it's not doing the thing that like, oh, we made a sex joke and the adults are laughing and the kids aren't. It's really hidden under there, but there's a lot of jokes that like the, you know, what do you remember? The Alamo. That's really funny because if you know how serious people take the Alamo, that's not inappropriate, but that's an adult joke. You have to have known the context. You have to understand what the Alamo is. You have to understand all those things. It adds an extra layer of context. And as a kid, when I started getting older, I could understand those jokes and they felt fun and freeing. You know, I love the journey of this film. I love all the characters he meets up with. I particularly love, I think Jan Hoax is out of this world hilarious in that scene in the Alamo where she's like, corn has over 2,000 uses, all of which I will tell you right now. Apparently she improv'd all of that. Jan Hoax is an amazing comedic actress, but she died fairly recently, I guess. And when she did, I kept rewatching this scene and thinking about how hilarious it is. And a lot of the performances from Elizabeth Daily to Mark Holton to Alice Nunn as Large Marge, Milton Berle's in it, James Brolin and Morgan Fairchild is the Pee-wee thing. And I love that like you have a scene where they go through a Hollywood studio, which could never exist because all these movies were not filmed at the same time, but clearly they were like, who cares? Let's have our idealized version of Hollywood and have fun with it. Let's have them go through like a beach scene and a scene with like nuns and a bike. I'm not exactly sure what the fuck that was. They go through a beach movie, a Santa Claus movie, a Godzilla movie, and a Twisted Sister video. How can you not like this movie for a scene where they go through a Hollywood studio and Godzilla and Santa Claus are in a movie together? I mean, they could have sold it just on that. Hey, Godzilla and Santa Claus are in like one scene together. I mean, that's pretty cool. Any other movie in cinema history had Godzilla and Santa Claus in it? And I don't even think you think of this as the Godzilla Santa Claus movie. And he does the Tarzan bit. And then he jumps over a house. Like, that scene is just out of this world amazing, and I love it. There's so much about this movie I'd love to quote and tell to you. I remember when I recorded it off TV one Saturday afternoon, I heard it was coming on, and I had to record it off TV off of like the UHF station at the time, which I think became the WB or something in Baltimore. And I just absolutely loved watching this movie. I watched it too much. And there's so much from it I would love to go over, and I've quoted over and over again, from the Alamo line to the stars at night are big and bright, deep in the heart of Texas. I quote this movie all the time. And it's because it has that amazing spirit. It has that fun attitude to it. And even when I watched it now, I was like, man, this is such a good movie. It's such a great comedy. I think it was very ahead of its time. It was why it could keep playing within the 90s. I mean, I saw it after the scandal and everything, and I still loved it. And it never felt creepy because Pee-wee doesn't feel creepy and Paul Rubin's performance doesn't feel creepy. He doesn't do it in that way. It's very interesting. There's so many like live action kid movie performances that do feel a little creepy and weird after a while and talking down to you. Pee-wee never felt that way. Pee-wee felt pure and imaginative and fun and amazing, and there was just so much there. And Amazing Larry, what was that about? It was just like there was too much there to even comprehend. There's so much amazingness and beautifulness. And also, by the way, where does Pee-wee live in the country? They never tell you this. You know he doesn't live in Texas and he doesn't live in Hollywood, but you never get a sense of like where they're going. I guess he's in the Midwest. It's like very funny. I was thinking about this today. It's like you never know where this road trip is going from one place to the other. What's up with that? But you believe it. And I think believing in this thing is why you believe in Bugs Bunny. You don't need to know who his parents were or who his origin story is. He lives in this untangible kind of world where you get to go on this beautiful, fun adventure for him, have a great time and laugh. None of this film, the world makes sense, but I believe it. I believe it completely because I want to believe in that world where your idealized version of adulthood exists. I think that's what's so beautiful about Pee-wee. That's probably what the thing that Pee-wee got more than all these other sort of man-child things tried to do, is that it exists in a world where Pee-wee is just Pee-wee. And it's this crazy, weird, kind of strange world, and he's just like a cartoon character like Bugs Bunny. And you see him go on adventures, you don't deal with him as a character. The most important thing in his world is getting that bike back. And frankly, if I had a bike that cool, I sort of get it. But that's what the most important thing to him is. And when you're a kid, the most important thing to you is something like that, where you miss something and it felt like life or death. Like that is the most important thing. And exists in that world so perfectly and so beautifully. That's kind of what makes the film so great, but also it's hilarious. There are very few scenes in this that don't make me laugh. Like, every scene, I'm laughing hilariously. I'm remembering a quote. I'm remembering a time where someone tells me why they think that scene's hilarious. It is just almost a beautiful, perfect comedy because it parodies what it's doing. It's ironic about what it's doing, but also loves what it's doing and has fun with what it's doing. That idea that you don't have to grow up in this untangible world and go on a big adventure and meet all these crazy characters and have like a dance scene in front of, was it the Satan's Helpers or whatever, like a biker gang, and do everything that this film does, exists in this wonderful world where you can go on this great adventure, this big adventure, and have an amazing time and laugh along with your friends while watching it, and almost have this film be a perfect encapsulation of the first time you watch it to the last time you watch it. Pee-wee's Big Adventure is kind of one of my more favorite and perfect comedies of an era that has a lot of great comedies, and a lot of great comedies who have lived on, from Spinal Tap to UHF and things like that, that almost exist beyond their time and are also of their time, but no one encapsulates that better than Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Pee-wee's Big Adventure is still probably one of my favorite movies, and I don't know if this review actually did it justice, but I think there's a reason we're still talking about this movie. We're still quoting this movie, and if I quote this movie, you will get it, because we all absolutely love it. It is beyond the 80s. It is probably beyond any stupid scams or anything like that, because it's just so good, so joyous, and so much fun. And just like Pee-wee looks for his red bike, I think I will always look and seek out this movie and revisit it every couple of years, just because it's so much fun. It gave me a grin and a smile thinking I could rewatch this again, and I will have that grin and that smile again when I rewatch it with my daughter in a couple of years, and I'm actually very excited to do that, but I'll probably rewatch it again before that too. So if you have seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And this is a winner of the Patreon movie review vote. If you would like to have a selection in the movie review vote next month, then please click on the link and pledge to my Patreon, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.